In 1995, a team of Egyptian archaeologists made a discovery so unusual that their report sat classified for over a decade. They had been excavating a dry, unremarkable stretch of desert in the western fringes of the Nile Delta, nowhere near the Valley of the Kings, nowhere near any known royal burial ground. And beneath 6 meters of compacted sand and rubble, they found a tomb. Not a modest one, a royal one. Scientists weren't supposed to find this. The shaft was sealed with a particular kind of limestone, the same grade reserved exclusively for pharaohs. The burial goods inside were gold. The walls were covered in royal iconography. But every single inscription that should have carried a name had been cut away. Not faded, not worn, deliberately removed, chiseled out with surgical precision. And when modern scientists finally tested the DNA of the body found inside, what they discovered should not exist. This is the story of an Egyptian ruler who was buried like a god, erased from history like a criminal, and whose very bloodline raises questions that Egyptology has never been able to answer. Let's go back to where it started. The site, located approximately 40 kilometers southeast of Alexandria, had shown up on a routine satellite survey as an anomalous density patch, a dip in the ground-penetrating radar signature that suggested a buried structure. The team that went to investigate expected to find a noble's villa, maybe a minor administrative building. The Delta was not royal burial territory. Everyone knew that. The pharaohs were buried upriver. The Delta was for the living, not the dead. That assumption changed the moment they hit the antechamber. The entrance shaft alone was 12 meters deep, twice the standard depth for non-royal Delta burials. The walls of the shaft had been lined with white limestone blocks fitted with a precision that archaeologists later described as extraordinary even by Egyptian standards. At the bottom, a portcullis slab, a massive stone barrier designed to crush tomb robbers, had been lowered but never triggered. Something had stopped the mechanism partway through. The slab hung at an angle, frozen in time, almost like a warning that had been interrupted mid-sentence. When they pushed through the gap and entered the antechamber with torches, they found themselves standing in a room that had been untouched for what radiometric dating would later suggest was approximately 3,200 years. The antechamber measured 8 meters by 12. Along the walls, there were cedar wood chests, imported cedar from Lebanon, their lids still intact, their contents still inside, painted ceramic vessels, alabaster jars that had been used for canopic purposes, a dismantled chariot whose gilded panels still caught the light, a wooden bed frame inlaid with ivory, and on the far wall, 2 full-sized painted figures of the god Anubis, the jackal-headed deity of death and the afterlife, flanking a sealed doorway that led deeper into the tomb. The team documented everything before touching anything. It was during this documentation phase that they noticed the first thing that didn't fit. The Anubis figures were perfectly standard. The iconography was correct. But above the doorway they flanked, where a cartouche should have been carved into the stone, where the name of the tomb's owner should have been written in hieroglyphics inside that distinctive oval border, there was nothing. Just a flat, smooth rectangle of stone that had clearly been worked. The surface was too clean, too even. Someone had come back to this place and ground away the name. They pressed on into the burial chamber. What they found there was stunning. The sarcophagus was quartzite, pink quartzite from the Aswan region, the same rare stone used for the sarcophagi of some of Egypt's most powerful rulers. It sat in the center of the chamber, on a raised dais, surrounded by 4 gilded wooden shrines nested one inside the other. The outermost shrine was 3 meters tall. The gold leaf on its surface was still bright, almost mirror-like in the torchlight. Inside the nested shrines, the sarcophagus lid had not been disturbed, but the mask had. Every royal Egyptian mummy of this period was buried with a portrait mask, placed over the face of the mummified body. These masks were made of beaten gold and colored glass paste, and they were considered among the most sacred objects in the burial. They captured the likeness of the deceased for eternity. This mask had been damaged, not by time, not by thieves, but deliberately. The facial features had been systematically destroyed, the nose broken away, the eyes gouged out. The forehead, where a uraeus, the rearing cobra symbol of royal authority, should have been, had been pried off and was missing entirely. The cartouche on the outer shrine, removed, The cartouche on the inner shrine, removed. The cartouche on the sarcophagus itself, removed. The cartouche on the canopic chest, removed. Every single identifying inscription in the entire tomb had been erased. And not carelessly. This had been done by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, someone who understood the religious significance of the name in Egyptian theology. To erase the name was to erase the soul. In Egyptian belief, the human soul had multiple components, and one of them, the Ren, was the name itself. Without a name, a person could not be recognized by the gods. Without a name, a person ceased to exist in the afterlife. Whoever this pharaoh was, someone had tried to kill them twice. Once in life, by removing them from the historical record. Once in death, by destroying the very mechanism by which their soul was meant to survive, eternity. That's when things got stranger. Behind the sarcophagus chamber, there was a hidden passage. This was not uncommon. Many royal tombs had subsidiary chambers for specific burial goods. But the passage in this tomb had been sealed from the inside with a different kind of stone, a rougher limestone, packed hastily. When archaeologists eventually cleared it, they found a second chamber, much smaller, undecorated, and inside it, a single object, a sealed clay vessel of a type that Egyptologists had never seen associated with royal burials. It was inscribed with what appeared to be a protective formula written in hieratic script, the cursive form of hieroglyphics used by priests and scribes. The formula was unusual. It didn't match any known funerary text from the Egyptian corpus. It asked for protection not from thieves or evil spirits, as was standard. It asked for protection from forgetting. Someone placed that vessel there deliberately. Someone who knew what was going to happen to this tomb. Someone who tried to preserve something, even if they couldn't preserve the name. The body inside the sarcophagus was well preserved by the standards of mummification. The wrappings were intact. The mummification itself was of the highest order. The resin used, the linen quality, the care with which the internal organs had been treated, all pointed to the most skilled embalmers in Egypt. This was not a rushed burial. This was the burial of someone who had enormous power and enormous resources. Someone whose body had been prepared with the same devotion given to the greatest pharaohs of the new kingdom. The physical remains were of an adult male. Estimated age at death was between 35 and 45 years. The skeletal structure showed signs of a robust, well-nourished individual. Wide shoulders, dense bones, a stature taller than the Egyptian average of the period. The hands showed no signs of heavy labor. The teeth were relatively good. This was a man who had lived well, a man who had eaten well, a man of power. And then the DNA results came in. It took nearly 7 years after the initial discovery for the technology to reach a point where ancient DNA extraction from mummified remains could be done with any degree of confidence. The team that finally ran the analysis used mitochondrial DNA sequencing combined with early nuclear DNA sampling. Their results were published in a restricted academic journal in 2003 and did not receive widespread attention. The results were deeply unusual. The mitochondrial haplogroup of the body, the genetic line passed through the mother, did not match any haplogroup predominant in ancient or modern North African or Near Eastern populations. It was not the haplogroup associated with ancient Egyptians, recovered from other archaeological sites. It was not sub-Saharan African. It was not Semitic. It was not Anatolian. The closest statistical match in the database at the time placed the haplogroup's probable origin somewhere in the region of the Eastern Caucasus, a broad area encompassing parts of modern Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the territories north of the Zagros mountain range. Let that settle in for a moment. The most lavishly buried ruler ever found outside the traditional Egyptian royal burial grounds, buried with full royal honors, quartzite sarcophagus, gilded shrines, the complete ceremonial apparatus of a pharaoh, had DNA that did not match the Egyptian population. It matched probabilistically a population from a completely different part of the ancient world, a region thousands of kilometers away. Now, there are several ways to approach this finding, and none of them are simple. The first possibility is mistaken identity, that this was not a pharaoh at all, but a high-ranking foreign dignitary buried with borrowed royal honors. This interpretation has significant problems. The scale of the burial is too large, too deliberate, too expensive to be a courtesy burial for a visiting nobleman. The quartzite sarcophagus alone would have required a direct royal commission. The cedar chests, the gilded shrines, the four nested enclosures. This was not a diplomatic gesture. This was a statement of absolute power. The second possibility is that this was a ruler whose origins were concealed during their lifetime. A king or queen of foreign birth who was presented to the Egyptian population as a native-born heir whose ancestry was managed as political information. This was not without precedent in the ancient world. Many dynasties incorporated foreign bloodlines through marriage, conquest, and adoption. The question then becomes, why was the erasure so total? Egyptian history has records of rulers who fell out of favor. Akhenaten, Hatshepsut, even Ramesses-era officials. The erasure of their names was political. But the pattern of erasure in this tomb goes beyond politics. The destruction of the face mask is personal. That kind of obliteration is not administrative. It is vengeful. The third possibility is the one that Egyptian authorities have been most reluctant to discuss publicly. And it is this, that during a period we do not fully understand, possibly a period of upheaval, invasion, or political discontinuity, a ruler of entirely foreign origin not just married into Egyptian power, but held it, wielded it, was recognized by the priesthood and the bureaucracy as legitimate, and was then, when the political winds shifted, not merely deposed, but erased. The clay vessel in the hidden chamber supports this interpretation in a disturbing way. The protective formula inscribed on it, the one asking for protection from forgetting, was written in a hand that specialists have identified as belonging to the highest tier of the priestly class. This was not written by a servant. This was not written by a tomb workman sneaking in a personal prayer. The vocabulary, the script, the specific theological framing all indicate someone of significant religious education, a priest, possibly a high priest, someone who knew what was about to happen to this tomb, someone who risked placing an object of protection in a hidden chamber, an act that, if discovered, would likely have cost them their life, because they believed it mattered, because they believed this person mattered. And then there is the matter of the tomb's location itself. The Western Delta was not royal burial ground, but it was the entry point. It was the zone through which all significant foreign contact with Egypt traveled, the roads from Libya, the coastal routes from the Levant and beyond, the trade corridors that connected Egypt to the broader Mediterranean and Near Eastern world. If you were going to hide a royal tomb of someone you wanted erased, the Western Delta is perhaps the last place you would expect to find it. And that may have been the point. Whoever buried this person knew the tomb would not be found by those searching for it. They chose obscurity deliberately. 3,200 years later, a satellite anomaly in a patch of unremarkable desert proved them almost right. Here is what we know with relative confidence. A person of probable Caucasian or Near Eastern origin, carrying a genetic signature not native to Egypt, was buried in approximately 1200 BCE, or slightly earlier, with full pharaonic honors in a location designed to avoid discovery. Every identifying feature of the burial was subsequently destroyed by a party with access to the tomb. Access that required knowledge of its location, which means it was done by someone who knew where the tomb was, which means it was almost certainly done by the Egyptian state apparatus itself. The destruction was religious in intent, and someone within that same apparatus placed a hidden object of protection before the destruction was completed. This is not a story of tomb robbers. This is a story of a government erasing one of its own rulers from existence. That's where the story takes a turn that most Egyptologists are unwilling to fully explore, because if this individual held genuine pharaonic authority, if they ruled even briefly, even unofficially, then we have a gap in our understanding of Egyptian history at this period. The late New Kingdom, the era of Ramesses II and his successors, is generally considered one of the better documented periods of Egyptian history. We have king lists, we have temple inscriptions, we have administrative papyri. And yet here is a burial that suggests someone ruled, or at least held royal power, who appears in none of those records, which raises a question that has no comfortable answer. How many others are there? How many rulers? How many periods? How many chapters of ancient history have been removed so completely? Not just from the physical record, but from the cultural memory, from the priesthood's accounts, from the scribal tradition, that we have no idea they existed at all? The tomb in the Western Delta is not a curiosity. It is a warning that the historical record we use to understand one of the greatest civilizations in human history may be missing entire volumes. That the Egypt we think we know, its dynasties, its rulers, its timeline, may be a curated version, a version edited by those who came after, shaped by politics and power, and the desire to control not just the present, but the past. The body of the erased pharaoh still lies in a climate-controlled storage facility maintained by the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities. The DNA samples are archived. The clay vessel is in a separate facility. The artifacts from the antechamber are catalogued but not publicly displayed. No official Egyptian statement has ever named this individual. No official designation has been given to the tomb beyond an internal reference number. And when researchers have filed requests to revisit the original DNA data using modern genomic techniques that would produce a far more detailed genetic profile than what was possible in 2003, those requests have been pending for years without resolution. We don't know who this person was. We don't know where they came from or how they came to be buried as a pharaoh of Egypt. We don't know who ordered the erasure or what crime, real or invented, justified it. We don't know whether the priest who hid the clay vessel was protecting a memory, a loyalty, or something else entirely. What we do know is that someone who held enormous power over one of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history was systematically removed from that civilization's memory, that the removal was so thorough that we cannot recover a single syllable of their name, that 3,000 years later, a satellite, a radar anomaly, and a team of archaeologists stumbled onto them by accident. And what we still do not know is this. If this erasure was so complete, so deliberate, so professionally executed, carried out by the very state apparatus that controlled Egypt's historical record, then how did we find this tomb at all? Was it truly an accident? Or was someone, somewhere in that ancient bureaucracy, not quite willing to let it disappear entirely? The tomb is sealed again now. The sand has been replaced. The coordinates are classified. Somewhere beneath the desert floor of the Western Nile Delta, an erased pharaoh waits. DNA that doesn't match any known population. A name that no longer exists. A face that was deliberately destroyed. And a small clay vessel in a hidden chamber, inscribed with a prayer against forgetting. Someone thought that mattered. Maybe it still does.